David Thompson had been looking forward to this day for months. The sun had barely risen, but he was already awake, carefully ironing his Marine uniform. Every crease had to be perfect, every medal and ribbon polished until they shone. This wasn't just another ceremony. It was his son's high school graduation, a moment David had promised himself he would never miss. Through all the years of deployments, training, and sacrifices, he had kept a single goal in mind: to be there for this day. David's son, a tall and determined teenager, had inherited his father's quiet strength. He had worked hard to make this day possible, and David had done everything he could to ensure he could witness it. As he put on his uniform, he glanced at the photograph on the dresser, a younger version of himself holding his son in his arms, both smiling wide. That photo had survived deployments, moves, and late nights. It was a reminder of why he served, why he endured, and why he kept pushing forward no matter the obstacles. He stepped out of his home, the morning air crisp and cool against his face. The neighborhood was still quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Driving toward the school, David's mind wandered to memories of his own graduation. He had been a proud young man, filled with ambition and dreams, but unlike that day, this one had more weight. Today he wasn't just celebrating personal achievement, he was celebrating his son, a young man who had grown under the guidance of a father who had fought battles both abroad and at home. As he approached the school parking lot, David noticed other families arriving. Cars were lining up, parents carrying balloons, flowers, and cameras eager to capture their children's milestone. The excitement in the air was infectious, a sense of joy that David felt in his chest. His heart raced with anticipation as he parked his car and stepped out, adjusting his uniform. Every step toward the gymnasium felt like walking through a sea of memories, pride, and hope. Inside the gym, the atmosphere was electric. Families filled the bleachers, students lined up in their caps and gowns, and the principal moved through the crowd, ensuring everything was ready. David's eyes searched for his son, spotting him nervously straightening his graduation robe and taking deep breaths. His son's friends were chatting quietly, some smiling, others fidgeting with excitement. Seeing his son like this, David felt a surge of pride so strong it almost took his breath away. David walked toward the bleachers, careful not to bump into anyone, offering polite nods and smiles. He had always been respectful, disciplined, and aware of the environment around him. But as he reached the entrance to the gymnasium, his steps faltered. Two security guards standing near the doors suddenly moved toward him with stern expressions. One of them stepped directly in his path. "Excuse me, sir," one guard said, his tone sharp. "You can't enter here. You need to leave immediately." David froze for a moment, disbelief flooding through him. He adjusted his posture, keeping his voice calm but firm. "I'm a Marine here to attend my son's graduation. I have identification and everything you need." The guard's eyes narrowed, scanning David as if his uniform was a threat rather than a symbol of service. "I don't care who you are. You can't stay. This is a private school event and we're asking you to leave." David took a deep breath, trying to maintain composure. He had faced much more dangerous situations than this, yet the sting of unfairness hit him hard. It wasn't just about being stopped. It was the way he was being treated. In his uniform, standing for his country, he was being told he didn't belong at a ceremony for his own child. "I'm here for my son," David repeated, his voice steady now, though the frustration was clear. "I've served my country, and today I'm simply a father attending his child's graduation. I have every right to be here." The guards exchanged glances, shrugging off his explanation as if it meant nothing. One of them stepped closer, his voice rising slightly. "Sir, I don't care what your story is. You need to leave or we'll have to escort you out." A few parents nearby began whispering, noticing the confrontation. Some students looked on nervously, sensing that something unusual was happening. David's son, standing in line, watched his father's back tense, worry etched across his young face. He had always admired his father's strength, but seeing him challenged in this way stirred something in him, a mix of fear, confusion, and protective instinct. David considered leaving, if only to avoid a scene, but his pride and sense of justice would not allow it. He looked the guard directly in the eyes. "I will not leave. I'm here to celebrate my son's achievement. If you attempt to remove me, you will be humiliating yourself, not me." The guard, taken aback by David's calm yet unwavering stance, hesitated, It was rare to see someone respond with such measured confidence when being confronted aggressively. The other guard muttered under his breath but remained silent, unsure of how to proceed. As the tension built, more people in the gym started to notice. A few teachers approached cautiously, trying to mediate, but even they seemed uncertain of how to handle the situation. The murmurs grew louder. Some parents started taking out their phones, recording what was happening, while others whispered words of encouragement to David. The crowd's attention was slowly shifting toward him, a mix of curiosity and indignation spreading through the room. David's son took a step forward, his small frame trembling slightly. "Dad, maybe we should go." "It's okay," he whispered. David placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "No, son. I promised I'd be here, and I will be here. Today is about you. I'll not let anyone take this moment away from us." The young man's eyes filled with tears, both pride and anxiety mingling together. He knew his father was right, yet he couldn't help but fear the confrontation escalating. Other students now turned their heads, some whispering, some visibly impressed by David's composure. The energy in the room was thick with tension, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. David adjusted his uniform one last time and took a step forward. The guards flinched slightly but held their ground. It was a standoff, a silent battle of willpower between authority and dignity. David had faced far more dangerous situations overseas, but this moment felt deeply personal. It was not about combat or strategy. It was about standing up for what was right in front of his son. In that tense silence, the first signs of support began to appear. One parent whispered to another about David's service. A teacher muttered to a colleague, "He's a Marine. He's not going anywhere." Slowly, the crowd's attention shifted entirely to him. Phones were pointed. Whispers grew into murmurs, and the two guards realized this confrontation was no longer private. It had become public. David's mind, though calm, was already planning his next move. He knew that holding his ground respectfully was the best course. There would be no yelling, no rash actions. He would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him lose his composure. His son needed him to be strong, and he would show that strength, even in the face of ignorance and prejudice. As the murmurs and whispers filled the gym, David remained steady, every inch of his posture radiating quiet authority. He had entered the room to celebrate a milestone, and he would do so, no matter the obstacles. It was not just about pride or service. It was about dignity, respect, and love for his child. The first part of the day ended on this intense note, a father standing firm, a son watching with admiration and worry, and a room full of people realizing that this graduation ceremony had just become more than a celebration. It had become a moment of courage, patience, and resilience, laying the groundwork for something that would soon surpass everyone's expectations. The tension in the gym had reached a point where everyone could feel it in the air. David stood his ground, his eyes fixed on the guards, but inside a mix of frustration and disbelief churned. He had faced danger overseas, seen situations where split-second decisions meant life or death, but nothing had prepared him for the audacity of being stopped in his own son's graduation. One of the guards, a tall man with a rigid posture, took a step closer, blocking David's path. "Sir, I said you need to leave," he said, his voice louder this time. It was meant to intimidate, but David refused to react in anger. Instead, he straightened his shoulders, keeping his voice calm and controlled. "I'm not leaving. I'm here to support my son. I'm a Marine, yes, but today I am simply a father attending a special moment in my child's life. I'm not here to cause trouble," the second guard muttered under his breath, obviously frustrated that his authority was being challenged. He glanced at the crowd, noting the curious eyes of parents and teachers who were now whispering among themselves. Their presence was suddenly less intimidating, and the guards seemed to realize that their actions were being watched by more than just the attendees. They were being silently judged. David's son, standing nearby, clenched his fists. He could see the anger and determination in his father's eyes. "Dad, maybe we should just leave." "I don't want a scene," he whispered, his voice tinged with worry. David turned to him and smiled gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Son, this isn't a scene. This is about standing up for what's right. I promised I'd be here, and I'm keeping that promise. Today is your day, and no one is going to take that away from you." The young man nodded, though a flicker of anxiety remained in his eyes. He trusted his father completely, but seeing a Confrontation unfold in front of everyone made him realize just how serious the situation was. Around them, whispers continued to ripple through the crowd. Some parents began quietly offering support. Others started filming the confrontation on their phones, sensing that this moment might be bigger than just a simple graduation ceremony. The first guard stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Sir, I don't care about your story or your service. You are breaking the rules. If you do not leave immediately, I will have to call security to remove you." David's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "You do not need to call anyone. I am not breaking any rules. I am a parent here for my son. If there is a misunderstanding, we can resolve it calmly, but I will not leave out of disrespect or fear." At that moment, a few teachers finally moved closer, speaking in low voices to the guards. "Please let him attend. He's a parent." "There's no reason for this," one of them said. The guards, however, seemed unwilling to back down. One of them crossed his arms and stared at David as if daring him to make the next move. It was a silent challenge, a test of patience and resolve. The gym was quiet, except for the murmurs of parents and students, and the tension grew heavier with each passing second. David felt his heart rate increase, but he kept reminding himself to stay calm. Anger would not solve anything. Instead, he relied on the discipline ingrained in him from years of service. He had faced hostile situations before, but never had it been about simply being present for someone he loved. "Look, I've served my country," David said, his voice firm but respectful. "I've defended this nation, risked my life countless times, and today all I want is to support my son. You can ask anyone here. I have a right to be at this graduation." The taller guard shook his head dismissively. "We don't care who you are. Rules are rules. You need to leave." David's gaze swept the room. He noticed a shift in the crowd. Parents were whispering to each other, some nodding in agreement with him. Students were pointing subtly, watching as the scene unfolded. The young man standing in the line for graduation, his son, was growing more anxious but also more determined. He looked at his father and realized that this was more than just a confrontation. It was a lesson in courage, respect, and dignity. Feeling the growing support, David decided to speak again, this time louder so the entire gym could hear. "I am a father. I am here for my child, and I will not be turned away for no reason. If you truly believe in fairness, you will let me stay." The guards exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. Their confidence had been rooted in the assumption that David would back down, that he would be intimidated by their authority. But standing there in his uniform, composed and calm, David projected a presence that could not be ignored. The murmurs in the room grew louder, parents whispering, "He's right, and he's just a dad." A teacher stepped even closer, addressing the guards politely but firmly. "Sir, he has every right to be here. There is no reason to escalate this situation." The second guard frowned, but he didn't respond. Instead, he shifted his weight nervously, clearly unsure how to proceed. David's son, sensing the tide was turning, straightened his posture, silently showing support for his father. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the parents, a veteran himself, stepped forward. "Let him be. He's a Marine and a father." "You're out of line." The guards hesitated, their rigid postures wavering. They could feel the weight of the room's attention, the silent judgment from everyone around them. It was clear they were no longer dealing with just one man. They were facing a united front of parents, teachers, and students who were unwilling to allow injustice to occur in front of their eyes. David took a slow breath, steadying himself. This moment was delicate. He didn't want to escalate into shouting or confrontation, but he also couldn't allow himself or his son to be humiliated. He decided to rely on his calm authority, a quiet power that had been honed through years of training and experience. "Thank you," he said quietly, addressing the parent and teacher. "I appreciate your support. All I want is to be here for my son's graduation. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less." The taller guard finally shifted his gaze toward the crowd, realizing the growing support for David. Whispers grew louder, some parents recording on their phones, others nodding and shaking their heads in disapproval. The second guard's jaw tightened as he muttered, clearly frustrated. David's son, watching the scene unfold, felt a mix of pride and relief. His father had always been a figure of strength in his life, but seeing him stand up in front of an entire gym full of people, calmly and respectfully confronting injustice, was inspiring. It was a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life, about courage, dignity, and standing up for what is right, even when it seems impossible. The murmurs in the room became a steady hum of support. Parents whispered to their neighbors, "He has every right to be here, and you can't just push him out." The students, curious and amazed, watched in silence, sensing that something important was happening beyond the usual graduation excitement. David remained calm, his eyes on the guards, waiting for them to realize that their authority had limits. He did not speak unnecessarily, but every word he had said carried weight. It wasn't just about asserting his presence. It was about teaching a lesson, quietly but clearly, that respect and fairness must be upheld. The second guard finally stepped back slightly, as if unsure whether to continue pushing. The first guard's expression hardened, but his movements were slower, less confident. The tide was turning. David could feel the shift in energy, the subtle support from the crowd, and he knew that his calm persistence was making a difference. As the confrontation continued, it became clear that this wasn't just a father fighting to attend his child's graduation. It was a demonstration of integrity, courage, and the power of standing firm in the face of ignorance. Everyone in the room, from parents to students to teachers, was witnessing a real-life lesson, a moment that would linger long after the ceremony ended. David's son took a deep breath, standing a little taller, feeling the pride of having a father who would not be intimidated. The whispers and murmurs around them grew louder, signaling that the crowd was now fully on David's side. The guards, feeling the weight of the room's attention, hesitated, their authority weakening with every passing second. It was in that tense, fragile moment that David realized he had done all he could. He had maintained his dignity, protected his son, and held his ground. Now the resolution would depend on what came next, the arrival of unexpected allies who could shift the balance completely, ending the standoff and restoring the respect that David and his son deserved. And though no one in the gym yet realized it, the story was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would leave everyone in the room stunned and forever change the memory of that graduation day. The tension in the gym was almost unbearable now. Every eye seemed to be on David, the calm Marine father who refused to be intimidated. The guards had begun to realize that their previous strategy of barking orders and expecting compliance was no longer working. The crowd's quiet murmur of disapproval was growing louder, parents whispering to each other, students glancing around, phones raised to record every moment. Even some of the teachers looked uneasy, unsure of how to resolve this standoff. David's son remained close by, still nervous but visibly inspired by his father's composure. He knew that his father was not just standing for himself, but also teaching a lesson in courage and integrity that went far beyond the walls of this gym. It was a lesson that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The taller guard, clearly frustrated, stepped forward again. "Sir, this is your final warning," he said, his voice sharp. "Leave now, or we will have to remove you ourselves." David held his ground, his eyes calm and steady, meeting the guard's gaze without flinching. "I am not leaving. I have every right to be here for my son's graduation. I am not a threat, and I have no intention of causing trouble, but I will not allow myself or my son to be disrespected." The guard's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had expected compliance, perhaps even fear. But David's calm authority was something he hadn't anticipated. The murmur in the room grew louder as parents and students began to recognize the injustice of the situation. A few brave parents stepped closer, offering quiet support. "He has every right to be here," one whispered to a neighbor. Another added, "We can't let this happen." David's son watched the exchange, his heart pounding. He felt a mixture of pride, worry, and anger at the guards for treating his father this way. He wanted to step forward to defend his father, but he knew that his father's calm and measured approach was the best way to handle the situation. He simply stayed close, offering silent support. The second guard, a shorter man with a frown that never seemed to leave his face, shifted nervously. He muttered something to the taller guard, clearly unsure of how to proceed. The taller guard waved him off, still trying to assert control, but the energy in the room was no longer on their side. A few more parents began whispering to each other, quietly pointing out the absurdity of the situation. "He's a Marine," one said. "Look at him. He's just a father here for his child." The whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire, and the guards began to feel the weight of the gym's collective disapproval. David noticed the subtle shift in the room. He could feel the support growing around him even if it was quiet and cautious. People were watching, judging, and slowly understanding that this was not just a confrontation between him and the guards. It was a test of fairness and respect in front of an entire community. Still, the guards refused to back down. "Sir, you've been warned," the taller guard said again. "If you don't leave, we will be forced to take action." David's voice remained calm but firm, carrying a quiet authority that resonated across the room. "I am not leaving. I have done nothing wrong. I am a father here for my son's graduation. I ask you one last time to let me attend peacefully. This is about respect, not rules. If you act against me, it will reflect poorly on your judgment, not mine." The taller guard hesitated, clearly unsettled by David's unwavering stance. The second guard looked around, realizing that their attempts to intimidate a single father in front of an entire gym full of witnesses were failing. The whispers in the room were growing louder, and some parents began taking out their phones to capture the moment. The energy had shifted, and the guards could feel it. David's son, standing close by, felt a swell of emotion. He had always admired his father's strength, but seeing him face down authority with such calm and dignity was inspiring. He realized that this was about more than just a graduation. It was about teaching a lesson that would resonate far beyond these walls. A teacher, sensing that the situation could escalate, moved closer to David. "Sir, you are right," she said quietly. "You have every right to be here. We will support you. Please, let's resolve this without anyone being humiliated." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. The taller guard's face reddened with frustration, but he could see that the crowd's opinion was no longer in their favor. The murmurs and whispers had grown into a low hum of disapproval, and it was clear that everyone was watching closely, waiting to see how this confrontation would end. David remained calm, his posture straight, his eyes steady. He knew that any sign of anger or impatience could undermine the quiet authority he was projecting. He had faced far more dangerous situations in his life, and he understood the power of patience, observation, and measured response. The crowd, sensing the tension, began to react more openly. A few parents clapped softly, a gesture of support that quickly spread. Others whispered encouragement, and the students, curious and amazed, watched closely. It was clear that this confrontation had become the center of attention, and everyone present understood the significance of what was happening. David's son, though still nervous, stood taller now. He felt a sense of pride swelling within him, knowing that his father was showing courage in the face of disrespect. He realized that this moment was teaching him an invaluable lesson about standing firm, speaking up for what is right, and handling conflict with dignity and calm. The taller guard, now visibly shaken, took a deep breath. He realized that continuing to confront David would only make the situation worse. The murmurs of support from the crowd were growing, and it was clear that no one was going to let them push this father out. The second guard shifted uneasily, sensing the same reality. David, sensing the hesitation, took a small step forward, his voice calm but carrying across the room. "I am here for my son. I am not a threat. I ask you to let me attend his graduation peacefully. Please consider what is right, not just what is convenient for you." The gym fell into a tense silence. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what the guards would do next. The murmurs had stopped, replaced by a palpable anticipation. Parents exchanged looks, students held their breath, and David's son clutched his father's hand tightly, silently rooting for him. It was clear that the confrontation had reached a critical point. The guards could either escalate the situation and risk public humiliation, or they could step aside and allow the father to be present for his son's milestone. The energy in the room was undeniable, and it was obvious that the crowd's support was shifting the balance. David remained calm, his eyes scanning the room, acknowledging the quiet support of the parents and teachers. He knew that maintaining composure was the key to resolving this without conflict. Every movement, every word was deliberate and measured. He was not just standing for himself, he was standing for his son, for fairness, and for the principle that no parent should be turned away from such an important moment. The guards, realizing that their authority had weakened, shifted uncomfortably. The murmurs and whispers in the room had grown into a steady chorus of support. Parents were now openly talking to each other, some recording the scene, others nodding in agreement with David's words. The students, sensing the shift, whispered among themselves, amazed by the quiet power of a father standing firm. David's son felt a mix of relief and pride. He understood that his father's calm and steady approach had turned the tide. He realized that courage was not always loud or aggressive. It could be quiet, patient, and firm. His father had shown him what true strength looked like, and it was a lesson he would never forget. As the guards hesitated, David remained composed, his gaze unwavering. He knew that the moment for resolution was near. The energy in the room had shifted, and it was clear that the crowd, the parents, and the teachers were on his side. The confrontation was no longer just about authority. It was about fairness, respect, and dignity, and David had shown that he would not back down. And in that tense, fragile moment as everyone waited silently, it became clear that the story of this graduation was far from over. Something extraordinary was about to happen, something that would leave the room in awe and permanently alter the memory of this day. The gym had grown tense and quiet, the crowd holding its collective breath. Everyone sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. David stood firmly, his calm authority radiating through the room, but he could feel the strain of the confrontation. He had remained composed, yet the guard's stubbornness tested his patience and dignity. His son stayed close, looking up at him with admiration and worry, silently urging him to hold on just a little longer. Suddenly, the double doors at the back of the gym opened. 6 men stepped in, moving with quiet precision, their presence commanding attention without a word. They wore casual clothing, but their posture, confidence, and calm energy made it clear they were not ordinary men. The entire room instinctively took notice. Conversations stopped. Phones paused mid-recording. Even the guards seemed to sense a shift in authority and turned their attention toward the newcomers. The first man stepped forward slightly, scanning the room with a calm, focused gaze. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, at David. There was a silent recognition, an unspoken understanding that had formed in a past shared through service and trust. The other 5 stood slightly behind him, forming a protective yet non-threatening semicircle. Their presence immediately changed the energy in the gym. David's son stared in amazement, unsure who these men were but feeling the weight of their authority. A parent whispered to another, "Who are they? They look serious." The murmurs grew as the crowd realized these men were there deliberately and intentionally, not by coincidence. The taller guard, noticing the newcomers, stiffened. His posture, once rigid and commanding, now seemed uncertain. The second guard fidgeted, muttering under his breath, clearly unsettled. They had expected to intimidate David, a lone father, but now 6 men with the aura of experience and authority had entered, silently challenging their control. One of the 6 men, who seemed to be the leader, stepped closer. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the guard's tense aggression. Without raising his voice, he said, "Sir, you have the wrong idea. He is a parent here for his child. You need to step aside." The taller guard's face reddened, his voice cracking slightly. I don't know who you are, but..." The leader held up a hand, cutting him off. "We are not here to argue. We are here to ensure that what is right is done. This father has every right to attend his son's graduation. Now please allow him to proceed." The gym went silent, every word sinking in. The crowd realized that this was not a casual suggestion. This was a silent warning backed by undeniable authority. The whispers that had been spreading through the room were now replaced by stunned silence. Parents exchanged glances, students widened their eyes, and even some teachers seemed slightly awed by the commanding presence of these 6 men. David's son clutched his father's hand tightly, looking up with wide eyes. "Dad, who are they?" he whispered. David smiled softly, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Friends," he said quietly. "Friends who know the meaning of standing up for what's right." The taller guard attempted to maintain a semblance of control, but it was obvious he was losing the standoff. "Sir, I can't." The leader of the 6 men did not raise his voice, did not make a threatening gesture. He simply nodded toward David and spoke calmly but firmly. "You have done nothing wrong. You are a parent. Step aside." The authority in his tone was unmistakable. The crowd could feel it, a quiet force that demanded respect without intimidation. The guards, sensing that their position had been completely undermined, looked around for support, but there was none. Every parent, every teacher, every student was watching, silently judging, and realizing that these men had the situation under control. One of the other 5 men stepped forward slightly, standing near the guards, their presence alone preventing any further escalation. His calm, unyielding posture communicated a simple truth. There would be no more bullying, no more disrespect, and no more threats. The guards were frozen, unable to act without causing further embarrassment and public scrutiny. David's son looked up, eyes wide, taking in the scene. He felt a wave of relief and pride wash over him. His father had remained composed through every tense moment, and now, with these 6 men standing beside him, the situation was finally turning in their favor. He realized that sometimes courage was not just about facing challenges alone. It could also mean knowing when support and solidarity could amplify the right action. The taller guard muttered something under his breath, clearly trying to regain control, but the leader of the 6 men simply shook his head slightly. His gaze never left the guard's eyes. And in that silent exchange, the guards understood that there would be no further confrontation. Their attempts to intimidate David had failed, and now they were on the losing side of authority and public perception. The crowd, sensing the change, began to shift in subtle ways. Parents nodded toward David, some murmuring words of support. Students leaned forward in their seats, curious and amazed by the sudden turn of events. Teachers, who had initially been hesitant, now moved closer, ready to support the father fully. The entire energy of the gym had changed. The tension that had gripped the room was replaced by a sense of justice being quietly restored. David, still calm, took a small step forward. "Thank you," he said quietly, addressing the 6 men, though his words were also for his son in the crowd. "I appreciate your support. All I want is to attend my son's graduation and celebrate his achievement." The leader of the 6 men gave a slight nod. "That is all you need to do. Everything else will take care of itself." The guards, realizing they had no path forward, finally stepped aside. Their rigid postures loosened, their faces red with frustration and embarrassment. The authority they had tried to wield over David had evaporated in the presence of integrity, support, and undeniable quiet power. David's son, seeing his father finally free to join the ceremony, felt a surge of joy and relief. He squeezed his father's hand tightly and whispered, "We did it, Dad." David smiled, bending slightly to meet his son's gaze. "We did, son. And remember, standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, is always worth it." The crowd, now fully aware of the confrontation's resolution, began to applaud quietly at first, then more openly as they realized what had just happened. Parents nodded in respect, students whispered excitedly, and even the teachers allowed themselves small smiles of approval. The gym, which had been tense and heavy with conflict, now felt lighter, filled with the sense of justice quietly restored. The 6 men remained near David, their presence a silent reassurance. They did not boast or make a scene. They simply ensured that fairness was upheld, that the father could now enjoy the moment he had fought so hard to protect. Their calm authority had changed the course of the event without aggression, without conflict, and without unnecessary drama. David's son, standing proudly, realized the significance of the moment. He had watched his father face confrontation with calm, courage, and dignity, and now, with these 6 men silently supporting them, he understood the true power of solidarity, respect, and standing firm in the face of injustice. The ceremony continued, but the energy in the room had shifted permanently. Parents and students alike would remember this day not just as a graduation, but as a moment when courage, integrity, and quiet authority had ensured fairness and respect. David walked with his son toward his seat, hand in hand, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and gratitude. He knew that this memory would stay with him, his son, and everyone present for the rest of their lives. And while the confrontation had been intense, the resolution had been even more powerful. It was a lesson in patience, calm, and the importance of standing for what is right. David had faced the challenge with dignity, and with the unexpected arrival of allies, he had secured not just his presence, but the respect that every parent deserves on such an important day. With the guards finally stepping aside, a wave of relief swept over David. He took a slow, deep breath, feeling the tension that had been building in the room for what felt like hours slowly drain away. His son's hand tightened around his, a mixture of pride, love, and excitement in his grip. For a brief moment, the gym was quiet, the audience collectively holding its breath as if acknowledging the significance of what had just occurred. This was more than a confrontation. It was a testament to dignity, respect, and courage. David adjusted his uniform, the medals on his chest catching the light from the gymnasium windows. He smiled at his son, who was beaming despite the nerves still lingering from the confrontation. "Are you ready?" David asked softly. The young man nodded, his eyes shining with admiration and excitement. "I'm ready, Dad," he whispered, his voice filled with relief and pride. As they walked toward the ceremony, the parents around them offered quiet nods, some whispering words of encouragement, others clapping subtly in recognition. Students watched with a mixture of awe and curiosity. The whispers and murmurs that had once filled the gym with tension were now replaced by a quiet hum of approval and admiration. David and his son had become the center of a story that everyone present would remember long after the day ended. The ceremony continued, but the energy had shifted dramatically. What had started as an ordinary graduation had transformed into something far more meaningful. The students lined up waiting for their names to be called, and David's son stood among them, straightening his robe and taking deep, steady breaths. He glanced at his father, drawing strength from the calm and steady presence that had carried them both through the earlier confrontation. When his name was finally called, David's son walked across the stage with confidence and pride. The applause from the crowd was louder than any earlier moments of the ceremony, and David's heart swelled as he watched him. He had seen his son grow from a small, curious child into a young man ready to face the world, and now he had the chance to share in this triumph. David's son shook hands with the principal, who offered a warm smile and words of congratulations. He received his diploma, holding it tightly as if to grasp the culmination of years of effort and dedication. The crowd continued to cheer, and David's chest swelled with pride. This was the moment he had fought for, the moment he had refused to let be stolen by ignorance or prejudice. After the ceremony, parents and students mingled, exchanging congratulations and taking photos. David knelt to speak with his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice full of emotion. "All your hard work has paid off, and you've done an amazing job." His son smiled, a mixture of pride and gratitude in his expression. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you being here. Seeing you stand up for me, it means everything." David smiled softly. "That's what fathers do. We stand by our children no matter what. Today was about you, but it's also a lesson about standing up for what's right. Never forget that, son." The crowd continued to buzz around them, but for a moment father and son were in their own world. They had faced tension, fear, and uncertainty, yet they had come through with dignity and tact. The memory of the confrontation with the guards and the arrival of the 6 men lingered in David's mind, a reminder of the power of calm authority and solidarity. Parents approached David, some offering congratulations and quiet thanks for how he had handled the situation. "You showed incredible courage," one parent said. "Most people would have backed down, but you stood your ground with dignity." David nodded humbly. "I was just doing what any parent would do. I wanted to be here for my child, and I wanted to show him the importance of standing firm and respectful in the face of unfairness." The 6 men who had entered earlier stood slightly to the side, observing the celebrations with quiet satisfaction. They did not seek recognition or attention, but their presence had ensured that fairness prevailed. David acknowledged them with a nod, silently expressing gratitude for their support. They returned the nod with quiet acknowledgement before blending back into the crowd, leaving David and his son to enjoy the moment fully. As the graduates and their families began taking photos, David's son pulled him toward a small gathering of friends. They laughed, shared congratulations, and posed for pictures. David stood slightly apart, watching his son interact with his peers, feeling a deep sense of pride. He had been there for so many moments in his life, but this one felt different, intense, personal, and profoundly meaningful. Later, as the ceremony drew to a close, David and his son walked outside. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow over the school grounds. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, congratulations, and the distant hum of cars leaving the parking.